You sent me a message this morning about the 49ers secondary, something you wanted to discuss. They had the worst coverage grade in the entire NFL last year. We've talked quite a bit about how important coverage is, the fact that the 49ers were worst. Not great. We do fully acknowledge that there's some dependency. There has to be some dependency on pass rush and coverage, right? So the Niners also had a horrible pass rush. We've been joking for a couple of years. They've been building the 7-3 technique defense. They've got nobody to rush off the edge. But this year now, Dee Ford, Nick Bosa, both through trade and the second pick in the draft, maybe that changes things a little bit. But for all the injuries that they had last year, guys not living up to expectations, can they turn it around from a coverage standpoint on the back end? It's an interesting mix of players.
Yeah, particularly as they didn't do anything really to address it. You know, they didn't attack it hard in the draft. They didn't go hard after free agents. The secondary, they basically said, we're going to rely on the players already in-house getting better, which to an extent makes sense. There's a lot of young guys within that secondary and Richard Sherman. So you could project a certain amount of growth from those guys because they are young. If they do get better, obviously the secondary gets better. But when you look at the list, it's an interesting group of players. So you've obviously got Richard Sherman, who in his career has been, arguably the best cornerback in the league overall. But
he didn't look great. So he was a guy whose stats were good last year.
Yes.
Benefited from a lot of overthrows, drops. I mean, he did not look great.
Yeah, lowest grade of his NFL career last season by a reasonable distance. First time he dropped into the 60s, even, his rookie year, right. He hit the ground running.
If you guys do follow, if you have premium stats, you follow PFF grades closely, you understand, hopefully you understand, we're explaining here that the grades and the stats sometimes don't match.
Particularly for corners.
Usually, a lot of times they do. And it's easier for us to tell a story. This guy's grading well, and he's allowing a passer rating of 32 or whatever it is, right? But when you see a guy that doesn't have a great grade, and he's given up a passer rating of 50 or a completion percentage in the 40s, then chances are there's something happening. He's either getting downgraded for penalties or he's giving up open throws that are missed by the quarterback, whatever it might be. And that was pretty much the case for Sherman last year. And teams also just really respected the reputation.
Yeah.
And did not attack him very often last year.
I mean, you can find some gifts out there of Richard Sherman getting torched last season that didn't happen in previous years of his career, whether or not they resulted in actual stats. Making it through is sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. But even if you just look at the raw numbers, it was a different player last year, right? Sherman, for his career, has allowed less than 49% of passes thrown his way to be caught. And he has, 5 straight seasons to start his career under 50. Only one season before last year above 50. Then last season it was 62.5.
Yeah,
so that's a huge jump forward. Also a career passer rating allowed of 55, essentially. And there was 3 straight years where that was under 50. Last season that was 100.
Yep.
So, even just looking at a couple of numbers there, you can definitely see an impact that last year was different than any other season of his career.
Yeah, definitely. And he still just wasn't targeted all that often.
Right. 40.
He was still living off of reputation a little bit.
40 targets, by the way, which is joint for the lowest number he's ever seen.
Or the fact that the other side was just bad. The rest of the secondary was just bad.
So that was always the Nnamdi Asamoah question, right? It's how good was he versus how bad was everybody else in that Oakland secondary when he was at his best.
Right.
I think it's a bit of both with him.
He was that 1 year, what was he targeted 28 times? Something less than
absurd.
2 per game.
And he also had the thing where he basically hit on the less targeted side of the field, never moved to the other side, et cetera, et cetera. So there was always questions there. But so Richard Sherman is this thing. How much was avoiding Richard Sherman and how much was, why would you ever go with Richard Sherman when the other side is a Keller Witherspoon was playing terribly? He was
a disappointment because he was a bit of a 1 year wonder at Colorado in 2016. But almost 6'3" or above 6'3", so really good size. Had a crazy 3-cone, just something you don't see for a guy his size. He gave up something like it was 3 for 20 or 3 for 30 when targeting him down the field his last year at Colorado. So he was kind of a younger football player, moved really well, good size, and had production. Usually all that stuff adds up. and it's a good thing. And he had a good rookie season when he had a chance to play.
Yeah.
In his sophomore year was just a very, very big disappointment, unexpected disappointment.
And to give you an indication, the worst season of Richard Sherman's career arguably was last year. That coverage grade was 68. Witherspoon's coverage grade was 39.8. So bad
Rough.
Richard Sherman was still 30 points better in grading terms than Witherspoon was.
Yeah, not
so
good.
Again, that's kind of why you don't go with Richard Sherman, because the other side of the field is way, way worse.
So he was rough. Again, the somewhat cyclical nature of cornerback play. It's, like when a quarterback does that or a pass rusher does that, we feel, those are numbers that are really indicative of what's going to happen next season. It's really a concerning number. It's hard to overcome it. At cornerback, it'll fluctuate a little bit more. So the idea of Witherspoon having a bounce back season is not out of the realm of possibility. So let's just say the 49ers have Richard Sherman on one side. He's still the best that they have, essentially, that you can count on. Who is playing opposite him? One of the options is Keller Witherspoon. We could see him bounce back. Who's he competing with that could actually make a move here?
Well, the obvious X factor is Jason Verrett. He's the one move they did make in free agency. And so Verrett is an all-pro caliber talent who has basically never played in his NFL career because of injuries.
He was an all-pro in 2015 caliber in 2015.
So he's as talented as Richard Sherman, and he doesn't have the age issue that Richard Sherman has. So arguably, a healthy Jason Verrett is their best cornerback. But he's long since past the point. He's in the Tyler Eifert category of, if you're planning on him being healthy, you're just teeing yourself up for failure.
The Tyler Eifert category of was really good in 2015 and hasn't played since.
Well, that, and if you're actually counting on him being healthy, you're an idiot, because why would you?
But when you
there's zero evidence anymore that he will be.
And we talked about him during free agency. We said, look, if you're a team, take a shot on him. Right. Why not take a shot at Verrett and see what happens?
His career is 1,266 snaps old, and it's 4 or 5 seasons old at this point. He's another one of the corners, by the way, that has one of those 90 graded seasons. So he's in that category of genuinely elite play. But at this point, you can only assume that you can only work on the basis of this is a bonus, right? That can't be your plan. If that's your plan, you've just done things badly.
Right. And I don't think that is the plan. I think it's just.
But that's the big X factor in this whole situation, right? Is if somehow the stars align and Jason Verrett heals himself, and the body stops breaking every time he touches somebody, you could immediately find yourself in a completely different category because you just found an all-pro corner off the street.
Right.
The more likely guy to be in this mix is Tavares Moore, who was a college safety more than he was a cornerback. They had this interesting draft.
Back to safety?
Well, they had this interesting draft a year ago where they drafted a safety or a corner and moved him to safety,
DJ Reed,
and a safety and moved him to corner.
Tavares Moore.
Right. And now
it's kind of a classic old Seahawks thing, right? There's a lot of safeties that are like 6'2", that have the length and all that stuff, and they in the Seattle scheme says, man, that's our long press corner guy that we like. That was what happened.
If this guy's got great movement skills, he's actually better for us at corner. He fits our prototype at corner more.
Yeah.
So if they figure out what they want to do with him, he's a guy that could force his way into the mix there, because as he's like Witherspoon in terms of having the length, having the size, having the movement skills, and a bit of experience there to do it.
And he might actually get some snaps at safety if things don't work out at corner.
Yeah, at safety, they've got Jaquiski Tartt, who is a good player, good, not great. And then the other safety spot, I think, is very much open for competition.
Adrian Colbert, currently listed as a starter. DJ Reed's in there. That's the guy we mentioned before. They drafted Tim Harris in the 6th round. He was a guy we had more of a 4th round grade on from Virginia. He's got good size, a little bit older, 24 years old. We have to, it's in our contract by law, we have to mention Christian Hackenberg once a podcast. You just did it again?
Well, yeah. It's in the contract. You need to read that thing, Steve.
Wow.
But what's most interesting about Tim Harris, my favorite nugget about him, is he was in Christian Hackenberg's recruiting class.
It is amazing the ways that we get Christian Hackenberg.
That's how long he was in college. Hackenberg has been out of 2 separate leagues already. And Harris was in the same recruiting class as him.
Harris hasn't even debuted in the NFL before Hackenberg's been booted out of 2 leagues.
2 separate professional leagues.
To be fair,
And
he
Harris
might have still had a job in the AAF next year as a backup somewhere.
God.
Okay.
Sure.
I
Okay.
can't believe you just trashed Hackenberg
Look,
again.
it's in the contract. You need to... You've had a habit now of not reading the contracts. I think you need to get in there and read the fine print, Steve. It's all in the fine print.
Rounding out the 49ers secondary, Jimmy Ward, who's played a safety nickel hybrid role throughout his career. Kawan Williams, who's been off and on as a reasonable slot corner. Either way, they need some improvement. What's their best case scenario? I think it's Keller Witherspoon maybe living up to what we thought he was going to be. And Jason Verrett, by the way, we talk about like corners getting thrown to the slot. We talked about that with the Chris Harris thing. Verrett was the guy coming out, even though he went in the first round, where I think a lot of people said, well, because he's 5'9", he's small, he's a slot corner, but he played on the outside with the Chargers. All of his top seasons were on the outside. So he's the guy who typically got thrown to the slot because he wasn't tall enough or wasn't physical enough or whatever people thought, but he was actually a really good outside corner. So I don't think he's going to end up, I mean, maybe they put him in the slot if Witherspoon develops and you just want to get Verrett on the field, but
Verrett has that fascinating size thing, and DJ Reed does as well. So he's this tiny cornerback, but played his entire time in college at cornerback.
Right.
And the NFL just looks at those guys, goes, no, you're too small, you're playing inside.
So they're going to improve this year or what?
Well, here's the thing, right? The 2 biggest additions to this secondary may well be Dee Ford and Nick Bosa, because we've talked before, there's this discussion about which is more important, coverage or pass rush. And in a vacuum, all things being equal, the data points to the idea that the coverage is more important. But nowhere does that dispute the idea that they have a symbiotic relationship, right? They help each other out. Coverage creates coverage sacks, which makes the pass rush look better, gives them more time to get to the quarterback. Equally, good pass rush, quick pressure, creates passes that shouldn't be thrown coming out, makes the secondary look better.
Also,
so they're both going to help each other, and suddenly the 49ers are going from no pass rush, other than what comes interior from, Buckner, et cetera, to potentially a great pass rush. If Dee Ford is able to back up a league-leading amount of pressure last season, if Nick Bosa is the player we think he is, if Buckner continues on that trend and even looks better because suddenly there's edge rushers around him, I mean, that could be suddenly one of the better pass rushing units in the NFL. And now the secondary doesn't have to hold up for 3.5 seconds every play. They get a second shaved off that, and they look way better without doing anything.
They should. I mean, you also get a different style of plays. If there's zero fear of the pass rush, it's a little bit easier to take deeper drops, throw the ball down the field, longer developing routes. Maybe teams aren't as comfortable going up against the 49ers because of that pass rush changed the way they play just a little bit. The one other point about the Niners in coverage, last year, between Reuben Foster and Keller Witherspoon, both guys, big disappointments from the 2017 class. Foster, of course, had all the off-field issues, is now in Washington and out for the season, but Foster was like a classic, perfect inside linebacker for that scheme, and he missed a zillion tackles. In coverage too. He would still flash the great plays that made us love him coming out of college, but they've replaced him essentially with Quan Alexander for all the issues that Quan has had in our grading system. Still speed, some speed, athleticism in the middle of the field. He has made a lot of plays on the ball over the last couple of years. If he can cut back on those missed tackles, maybe that ends up actually being an improvement over the Reuben Foster that we saw when he was on the field last year.
Well, alternatively, what you're doing is replacing one human missile with a ton of missed tackles with another human missile who will miss a ton of tackles. So it should net out the same.
So there you go. There's your 49ers secondary back 7 breakdown, really.